If you are an Indian immigrant in the United States and you have started changing your life in small ways like skipping trips, avoiding airports, delaying paperwork, or even staying home more than you used to, you are not alone. In the past few years, especially during periods of tougher immigration messaging and enforcement emphasis under President Trump, a lot of people have described the same feeling. Not that there is one single new rule that locks you in, but that the risk of one mistake feels higher and the consequences feel faster. By the end of this video, you will know three things. First, what kinds of policy shifts and enforcement trends people are reacting to, in plain English. Second, who is most affected versus who is usually not affected, including the confusing edge cases. And third, a practical do this and avoid this plan you can follow this week to lower your risk and lower your stress without relying on rumors. Now, before we go further, a quick clarity point. When people say they are trapped inside their own homes, that is usually not a literal legal restriction. For most people, it is a risk calculation. They worry that travel could trigger extra questioning, that a small paperwork issue could become a bigger status problem, or that a random encounter could spiral. And when you have a pending case, a visa renewal coming up, or family members depending on you, that fear can quietly reshape daily life. Here is the part most people miss. Immigration policy is not just laws. It is also how agencies interpret rules, what they prioritize, how consistently they issue requests for evidence, how strict they are at ports of entry, and how fast they move cases. That is why two people on the same visa can have totally different experiences depending on timing, travel plans, and documentation. So what changed in a way that could make people feel stuck? During tougher periods of immigration policy, several patterns tend to show up at the same time. Processing can feel slower or more unpredictable. Scrutiny on applications can feel higher, meaning more requests for evidence and more denials if something is incomplete. Enforcement messaging can get louder, and that changes behavior even for people who are following the rules. And at the border and airports, officers may ask more questions, especially if your situation is complicated or if your documents do not match your story perfectly. None of that is meant to scare you. It is meant to explain why the same family that used to travel confidently might suddenly decide to avoid leaving the country, or avoid changing jobs, or delay filing something they should file, which ironically can create more problems later. Here is a simple definition that helps. Status is what lets you stay in the US legally right now, while a visa is the sticker in your passport that is used to request entry at the border. People mix these up constantly. You can be in valid status in the US even if your visa stamp is expired. But if you leave the US, you might need a new visa stamp to come back. This is one of the biggest reasons people feel trapped. They are doing fine inside the US, but they are afraid to travel because the return trip includes an interview, a consulate appointment, and a CBP inspection at the airport. And if you have ever heard the phrase, "do not leave while something is pending," this is usually what people are talking about. And this is where people get denied or delayed. Not because they did something wrong, but because they traveled without understanding what happens at re-entry, or they changed jobs without understanding how their status is tied to employment, or they assumed a pending application automatically protects them when it might not. Now let us get specific about who is affected. If you are an F1 student, a lot of your life runs through your school and SIVIS reporting, and the small details matter. Full-time enrollment rules, work authorization like OPT, and travel signatures on your I-20 can become high stakes. A small administrative delay can cause big anxiety, especially if you need to travel for a wedding, a family emergency, or graduation. If you are an H-1B worker or on a related work status, your legal stay is often tied to your employer, your job role, and your work location. That can make people feel cautious about changing jobs, traveling during an extension, or even going through a layoff. If you are in the family-based system, maybe you are waiting on an I-130, consular processing, or adjustment of status. The fear there often comes from long waits, changing processing times, and the feeling that one mistake could push you back months or years. And if you are a small business owner, especially in communities where families rely on you, the fear can show up as avoiding anything that could bring attention. Workplace audits, compliance questions, or even just public exposure when you are already exhausted from running the business. Now, who is not affected in the way viral posts suggest? If you are a U.S. citizen, you are not at risk of losing your right to live in the U.S. because of routine immigration enforcement shifts. That sounds obvious, but mixed-status families sometimes forget that the citizen spouse or citizen child is not the same legal category as a non-citizen family member. If you are a lawful permanent resident, also called a green card holder, you generally have a strong status, but travel can still matter if you take long trips abroad or have issues that could raise questions at the border. The key is not to assume you are immune, but also not to assume you are one step away from losing everything for no reason. Most people are somewhere in the middle. They have lawful status, but they have a renewal coming up, or they have a pending case, or they are planning travel, and they want to avoid avoidable problems. Here is a quick myth versus reality moment. Myth: if you stay home and avoid everything, you cannot get in trouble. Reality: avoiding paperwork, avoiding renewing documents, or skipping required updates can create the exact risk you are trying to avoid. The goal is not to hide. The goal is to be organized, consistent, and verifiable. Second, myth versus reality. Myth: any interaction with police automatically triggers immigration action. Reality: the immigration impact depends on many factors, including your status and the nature of the interaction. You should not assume the worst based on internet stories, but you also should not assume it cannot affect you. If you ever face a serious legal issue, that is when people should talk to a qualified attorney, because immigration and criminal law can interact in complicated ways. Now let us talk about the day-to-day behaviors that make people feel trapped and why they are happening. Travel is number one. Travel does not just mean international travel, but international travel is the big one because it includes a new entry request. People worry about being pulled into secondary inspection, being asked for proof of employment, proof of school enrollment, proof of ties, or being questioned about something that is technically fine but hard to explain quickly. The second big behavior is avoiding paperwork. Some people delay filing an extension, delay renewing a passport, delay updating an address, or delay responding to an agency notice because they are afraid of drawing attention. But in reality, failure to respond to an official request, missing a deadline, or not keeping your records straight is what creates the biggest avoidable problems. Third is avoiding public spaces. This usually comes from generalized enforcement fear and the sense that any mistake could be expensive. The fact is, for most law-abiding people, the biggest risks come from preventable administrative problems. Expired documents, inconsistent information across forms, not keeping copies, not tracking case numbers, or relying on a friend of a friend for advice. Here is the part most people miss. The system is not just strict, it is also bureaucratic. That means when things go wrong, it is often because of a mismatch in records, not because someone decided to target you personally. Think about how many systems can be involved. USCIS for benefits, the State Department for visas, CBP at the border, CVIS through a school, and sometimes DMV or employers verifying work authorization. When you have multiple systems, consistency becomes your superpower. Now, why is this happening? Policy eras that emphasize tougher immigration approaches often prioritize enforcement, increase vetting, and narrow discretion in certain areas. Even without one single new law, agencies can change guidance, shift staffing, or change how they interpret evidence. Add in backlogs, and you get longer waits and less predictability. When predictability goes down, anxiety goes up. And communities that are heavily represented in work visas and employment-based green card queues, including many Indians in tech and healthcare, can feel that anxiety more intensely because their timelines are long and their life planning depends on stable status. Another key driver is uncertainty itself. If you are planning a wedding, a home purchase, a job change, or bringing parents for a visit, you want clear rules. When rules feel like they could shift, people react by limiting exposure. This is also why rumors spread so fast. Someone posts a scary story, it travels through group chats, and then people assume it is a new policy when it might be a one-off experience, a misunderstanding, or something that happened for reasons the post does not explain. So let us separate what we can verify from what we cannot. We can verify that immigration outcomes depend heavily on your category, documentation, travel plans, and whether you follow required procedures. We can verify that enforcement posture and vetting emphasis can change by administration and over time, and that processing delays and requests for evidence can rise and fall. What we often cannot verify from viral posts is the full context of a single denial or border incident, because we do not know what documents were missing, what prior history exists, or what the officer saw in the system. So if you take one thing from this section, let it be this. Do not build your life plan on a screenshot. Build it on your actual documents and official guidance. Now, real-world consequences. First, job mobility. If your status is tied to an employer, you may feel like you cannot switch jobs or negotiate because the paperwork feels risky. But sometimes, not moving can be the bigger risk if your company is unstable. The answer is not panic. The answer is planning. Understand timelines, keep copies of everything, and coordinate carefully with your employer and, if needed, a qualified attorney. Second, driver licenses and state ID. In some states, the documents you need depend on your status and your current proof of authorized stay. If your extension is pending, some systems accept certain receipts, others do not. This can create the everyday feeling of being trapped because without a license, you cannot work or take your kids to school easily. Third, families and travel emergencies. Many Indians in the US support family back home. When a parent gets sick, the instinct is to get on a flight. But if your return requires visa stamping and your case is complex, you may hesitate. That is an emotional burden that does not show up in policy memos, but is real. Fourth, students and internships. Students worry that a paperwork mistake could end OPT or create status issues. So they avoid opportunities, avoid travel, or avoid reporting changes promptly out of fear. Fifth, small business operations. Owners may fear audits or misunderstand compliance obligations, leading them to either overreact or underreact. Both can be costly. Let me give you two example scenarios to make this concrete. Example scenario 1. An F1 student in the US has a visa stamp that expires soon, but their status is fine because they are enrolled and their I-20 is valid. A family wedding is coming up in India. They hear a rumor that students are being denied re-entry. They decide not to travel. The real decision point is not the rumor. The real decision point is, can they get a visa appointment? Do they have all required documents? Is their SIVIS record clean? Do they have a valid travel signature? And can they explain their program and finances clearly? The right approach is to talk to the school DSO early, review the travel packet, and make a plan. Example scenario 2. An H-1B worker has an extension pending and is considering a job change. They also want to visit family abroad. They hear that leaving during a pending case is always forbidden. Not always. The details matter. The safe approach is to understand what documents you would need to re-enter, whether you will need a new visa stamp, and whether the job change changes your filings. The key is planning and not making irreversible moves based on half information. Now we get to the most practical part. What to do now in a do this and avoid this format. Do this. Keep a clean document folder. That means copies of passports, current and prior visas, I-94 records, approval notices, receipt notices, employment letters, recent pay stubs if you are on a work status, school enrollment and I-20s if you are a student, and any USCIS notices. If something goes wrong, having organized proof reduces delays and stress. Do this. Check your I-94 after every entry to the US. Mistakes happen, and catching them early matters. Do this. Track your deadlines. Passport expiry, I-20 travel signatures, OPT reporting requirements, extension filing windows, and address updates. Use calendar reminders. Avoid this. Do not ignore mail from USCIS or other agencies. If you get a request for evidence or an interview notice, respond on time. Delays and denials often come from missed notices, especially if you moved and did not update your address properly. Do this. Update your address properly when required, and keep proof you updated it. Avoid this. Do not rely on group chat instructions for filing forms. Use official instructions and, if needed, professional help. Do this. If you plan international travel, create a travel risk checklist. Ask, do I need a new visa stamp to return? Do I have time for potential delays? Do I have proof of my current status? And do I have a backup plan if a consulate appointment is delayed? Avoid this. Do not book non-refundable international travel if your situation is time-sensitive and you cannot afford delays. Do this. If you are a student, talk to your DSO before travel and before changing anything about your work authorization. If you are on OPT, make sure employer details and reporting are correct. Do this. If you are on a work visa, keep your job details consistent with your filings. If your work location or role changes, ask your employer what needs updating. Avoid this. Do not assume HR has handled everything unless you have confirmation. Do this. For families with mixed statuses, make a household plan. Know who has which documents, who is the emergency contact, and where your important records are. This is not about fear. It is about being prepared like you would be for any major life system, taxes, insurance, or healthcare. Now, where should you verify information? Use official sources for the basics. USCIS for benefit processing and form guidance. The State Department for visa processes and consular information. CBP for entry procedures and I-94 records. If you are a student, your school international office is a key source because they manage SEVIS-related requirements and can tell you what is needed for travel signatures and compliance. And for case-specific questions, especially when there is any risk, a qualified immigration attorney can help you understand your options. This is where people get stuck. They try to solve a case-specific question with general internet advice. General advice can point you in the right direction, but it cannot replace someone reviewing your facts. Here is another myth versus reality. Myth: if you have a receipt notice for a pending application, you are automatically safe in every situation. Reality: a receipt notice means USCIS received something. What it does and does not authorize depends on what you filed, your current status, and your category. Receipts matter, but they are not magic shields. One more myth versus reality. Myth: every denial or delay is political. Reality: some outcomes are policy-driven, but many are documentation-driven. Incomplete evidence, inconsistent answers, missing signatures, and missed deadlines cause plenty of problems even in calmer periods. The best strategy is to control what you can control. Now, what could happen next, and what should you watch? Watch processing times and case trends. If more people file at once, delays can increase. Policy tone, enforcement emphasis, and bureaucratic unpredictability can absolutely change how safe people feel. But the way out of that trapped feeling is not to hide. It is to replace uncertainty with a system. Documents, deadlines, verification, and a realistic travel plan. Here are 5 quick recap points. 1. Most people are not literally trapped by a single rule, but they are reacting to risk and uncertainty. 2. The biggest practical pressure points are international travel, renewals, and any life change that affects your status. 3. Who is most affected tends to be students, work visa holders, people with pending cases, and mixed status families who cannot afford mistakes. 4. Do not let rumors drive decisions. Verify with USCIS, State Department, CBP, and your school, and get qualified help for case-specific risks. 5. The best way to reduce anxiety is to be organized, respond to notices on time, and plan travel and job changes with buffer. If this video helped you make sense of what people mean when they say they feel trapped, subscribe for clear, calm updates and practical checklists. And if you want, leave a comment with your general category, like student, work visa, green card applicant, or permanent resident, and what situation you are trying to plan around, travel, renewal, or job change, and we will cover the most common scenarios in a future video.